Welcome back to the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. We have a great show for you. We're going to talk Rolls-Royce, Mercedes-AMG E53, the BMW 2 Series, and that's just what we've been driving. We have HRV Dispatch, our series on reports from the field, if you will, and we'll break down some car news. Car executives want the tax credit cap lifted. The Chevy Blazer breaks cover. It's quite the looker. And there's a couple of Ford recalls that are pretty significant. Finally, we will spend your money. With that, let's bring in senior editor for all things consumer, Jeremy Korzeniewski. How are you?
I am hot and sweaty. We're recording this and it's pretty early in the morning and it's already sweltering out here in Columbus.
80 degrees here in the northern suburbs of Detroit. And it is, again, pretty early. And it's not just hot. It is, as you said, sweaty.
Yeah, it's
damp.
Yeah, it's like a swamp outside.
Cut the grass with my electric lawnmower last night, and I was drenched by the time I was done with it. I was not quite ready for that.
I went and saw an outdoor concert last night, which was really poor timing. We had bought the tickets way in advance, not knowing that it was going to be 94 degrees out and sweltering. Yeah. So fortunately, we found a spot in the shade and water was readily available. But man, it was hot, uncomfortably so.
Yeah, there's some great outdoor venues around here, but it, you really got to start putting down some hydration beers, some Coors Lights or something, just to keep. Yeah, probably electrolytes isn't the right word, but stay hydrated.
I walked up to the beer stand. And I was ordering a local Platform Ohio. It's a Ohio brewery. I was about to order a Platform IPA, and I said, "You know what? Make that a Mick Ultra." And he looks at me, and he's like, "Yep, got to stay hydrated."
Yeah, I was going to say a Platform IPA in this weather. I mean, you need one or two of those, you're done.
Yeah, so. Exactly.
All right, let's talk about what we've been driving. Don't drink and drive, as a friendly reminder to everybody out there. But we'll talk some summer beers maybe as we get through the podcast. I guess let's kick things off with the Rolls-Royce Cullinan. I mean, why not, right? This is the first Rolls-Royce I have ever driven. I've been fortunate to drive some cool cars, as I know you have, and there's certain edge case cars that just don't come through the fleet. Maybe you don't, a trip comes up and you're not able to make it work. Somebody else goes on it. That's just the way the world works. But this one cost $429,400. The base price was $341,500. I, of course, had to go with some options and some other things. Nearly $90,000 worth of options. But it was a beautiful car. I'm coming up with kind of a bit of a feature, and basically some of the things that stood out to me is what I'm trying to sort of contextualize, because we've already done a road test. We've already done a first drive. So, I mean, for me, it's kind of does this car feel more special than something else you might get? And I did drive a Maybach fairly recently. Mm-hmm. I would say slightly more. It's one of those things, though, where it's just the aura of Rolls-Royce does still have tremendous value. There's a cachet to it.
For sure.
So to me, it is still a Rolls Royce. And I mean, when you pull up in a Rolls Royce, I mean, people just, their jaws drop. They're like, What is that? So it was tremendous.
Yeah. Interesting you say that, because I've driven a couple Rollses now. I had a Rolls Royce Ghost for a week. And then I did the initial press launch in Switzerland of the most recent Phantom. Okay. And I mean, I thought the Ghost I drove first, and I thought, wow, this car is special. And then I drove the Phantom, and I'm like, no, this car is special. And I think you buy a Ghost because you want to have the appearance that you're driving a Rolls Royce, and I totally get that, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. You buy the Phantom if you actually want the real legit Rolls Royce experience. The ridiculous solidity of the ride, opulence and cut out of a single piece of metal feeling. And I've never driven the Cullinan, so I don't know if it like has that kind of sense of specialness or not. Being that it's like its own bespoke thing, my assumption is that it probably does. And I still think of the Phantom as like Rolls' flagship, like the quintessential Rolls-Royce. But I think the one that we're going to be seeing the most on roads moving forward is for sure going to be the SUV, right?
Yeah, I tell you what, when Rolls-Royce finally does an SUV, like, that's where the market is.
And Ferrari coming right up.
Ferrari coming right after him. I thought it, as far as like, does it feel like a Rolls, like some of the cars you mentioned, and I haven't driven the Ghost or the Phantom. Part of it was the name, which I believe is like a rare jewel or something, or evokes that. I think because it's an SUV and it is like a different kind of like name, for me, there was a little bit of not quite the aura, still a ton of aura, if you will. It's still a roller, but that part was a little bit different. And even some people, remarked when I pulled up and it's like, oh, that's a Rolls-Royce, that's cool. But it was also like, but that's an SUV. And,
right.
Even, pick your different brands that do things that are a little different than what they maybe originally have done, like the Jeep Grand Wagoneer, which they've done that for years. But still, when you see an enormous Jeep SUV, it's a little jarring, or different Porsches, things like that. There's still a little bit of dissonance, I think. So, but I mean, as far as like just the styling cues, I mean, the hood ornament goes up and down, the Spirit of Ecstasy.
Does it have umbrellas that pop out of the doors?
I did not see those. It may have. I don't see them on the option list here, though. It did have the suicide doors that open up, and you could use buttons so that it can open or close at a push of a button. Like all of just this, like, Downton Abbey level of, opulence was there. It was interesting, too, because it was Jubilee Silver. And so this is the week of the 70th, or it was the week of the 70th for the Queen. So it's like, well, this is all just kind of lining up. It did remind me, too, it was a little imposing, if that makes sense. I'm trying to find the specific color. It was, where did that color go? It was, in simple terms, it was gray, but with a little bit of like kind of black on it. So it really had that kind of like British battleship kind of look, if you will, as far as being imposing. So that was cool. So anyways, it's a very imposing vehicle. It's about as long and wide as I think a Chevy Tahoe. I think it's actually even wider than a Tahoe by a few inches. So it's a big vehicle.
So it was battleship gray and the size of a battleship, basically.
I was doing...
Kind of floats over the road like one, too, right?
Indeed. Have you ever heard of a boat called the HMS Hood ship?
I don't think so.
All right. It's a battleship the British built for World War I. It was sunk in World War II by the German battleship Bismarck. That is your history lesson from Greg. But I happened to be just kind of randomly Googling that chapter in history. And I don't know, it just, British things kind of lined up when I had the roller. I'm told that there were crystal flutes somewhere, but I didn't have them in there. Or at least they could come with it. That may be another COVID thing. The Mailbag, we had a few weeks, didn't have the silver plated flutes. So, I mean, even in, it's 2022, inflation, still pandemic, vestiges, you got to have some cutbacks. You can't have we can't be sharing crystal flutes, I guess, so it goes.
So it goes.
I don't know. I mean, it's a Rolls Royce. My story will be coming out in a couple of, probably maybe next week, I think. I think after driving this car, it gave me, I think, a good, inclination and feel that the brand is still pretty viable. Because sometimes you wonder, like, well, okay, what really is a Rolls Royce in this day and age? Well, it really is a rolling status symbol that's built like a tank, that is just super luxurious. Obviously, there's always a market for stuff like that. But then when you experience it, you feel like, hey, this is definitely a legit execution. So,
yeah, I mean, That's the thing about it. You mentioned it's a status symbol. Basically, you can get a much less expensive vehicle that's going to drive super well, feel super luxurious, give you all the bells. And I mean, you could very easily cut the bill of the Rolls-Royce in half
Mm-hmm.
and end up with a really great car.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a Rolls. And so as long as, people are saying, but it's not a Rolls, then I think the brand will be viable.
Yeah, I think you have a great point. I mean, you could get a Maybach for literally half the price, which is probably another super expensive car. You could get a rare vintage car for half the price. So it is, how do you want to prioritize? How do you want to like what kind of level of richness do you want to portray? And I mean, it's clear this is generational wealth as opposed to like an S-Class, which, you could just be doing well on your investments and probably get. So,
You mentioned Downton Abbey. Have you ever seen Gilded Age on HBO Max?
I need to. I don't have HBO Max right now. I need to because I want to get back into the West Wing. But
yeah, so you mentioned generational wealth again, versus like new wealth. That's the story kind of revolves around that, and it just reminded me of the more things change, the more they stay the same. Like you're watching the show and you're like, man, I can't believe they're treating them like that. Like they're lesser people, blah, blah, blah. And we're still talking about, well, you could get the Maybach, but for twice the amount of money, you could get the Rolls.
Right.
And that's like, a status symbol of generation. I mean, it's the same.
Yeah.
Humans are the same.
One of the funny things, and this is kind of a funny footnote to history too, I noticed, is Rolls Royces were used by Lawrence of Arabia in World War One. I was going through the press pack, because when a car arrives, you want to read up on all facets of it, try to educate yourselves. And I thought to myself, this is a really cool chapter of history. I want to try and weave some of it into just this like kind of mini feature I'm going to write. But also, what a stretch. Like, is there this is an SUV. You're building an SUV. Yes, there's a common thread that Rolls-Royces were used for rough, rugged war 100 years ago. But really? I mean, come on. Mm-hmm. That would be like Cadillacs actually were used in World War One. I believe they were for like the generals' cars, which would make sense. And they also had very powerful engines. But would anybody turn around and justify Cadillac making an Escalade because they were used in rugged campaigns 100 years ago? I don't know. It's someone probably would. But I was going to say, I got to really give them some credit. This is a stretch. It's super interesting. I am going to try to write about it, but wow. Okay.
Greg dropping the history lessons in the podcast today too.
So let's go to the present and talk about the AMG GLE SUV that I just drove. This was a paltry $90,000, $550 was the sticker. 429 horsepower. This is probably the most extended time I've had with the new inline-six turbo engine. Like I said, 429 horsepower, 384 pound-feet of torque. It had that EQ boost feature, which I thought was pretty neat. 9-speed automatic, which, is, okay. I found it to be a little like hunting for gears in the low ranges, unless you were in more of a sporty mode. But overall, pretty good. For me, this reminded me, I think, that I still tend to look at the GLE as maybe the best in its class. It's probably ahead of the X5. And I think they're both very, very good. Beautiful car. It had the AMG interior with kind of like the red and black sort of seats and leathers and all that good stuff.
I still think that's where I think interiors is where Mercedes really sets itself apart from BMW.
Yeah.
They all drive really well. Their powertrains are spot on. Like everything's great about the experience of it. But the Benz just looks classier inside. Like the BMW is like austere luxury, and Mercedes is kind of morphed into like I don't know, more like ostentatious luxury with like quilted everything and chrome and matte finishes and beautiful woods and stuff. And they instead of like letting that be subtle, they really highlight it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's interesting. I am in a BMW X3, so a step down, as far as
Hmm.
size, but still a very nice vehicle. And interior is pretty nice, but compared to the like this, of course, I mean, this was a nicer interior, and I would agree with you, especially the AMGs. I think the AMG like lineup, even like compared to the M lineup, they cost about the same, and they
Hmm.
use a lot of the same materials, carbon fiber trim, leather, but AMG
Hmm.
just pulls it all together in a
Yeah.
better way, I think.
Yeah, and they do a good job keeping it cohesive. That's the one thing about the BMW is, 10 years from now, you'll look at the interior and it's still, it's not going to be the infotainment for sure, but the rest of it's not going to look dated. Like you're not
Yeah.
going to be able to say, oh, that's the BMW of X era. And that probably will be true of the Benz, but I mean, we're talking like a decade from now when, these luxury cars are going to be, they're going to have lost 75% of their value at that point anyway, and then they're just used cars. So I don't think that matters quite so much, but, there is something to be said for, um, just kind of like consistency of design, which BMW does a really good job interior wise, a terrible job exterior wise, but
Yeah.
that's a topic for another discussion.
Indeed. Have you driven the straight six, the new Mercedes turbo?
I have,
What do you
yeah.
think?
No, it's my favorite.
Hmm.
It's my favorite of BMW or of Mercedes' current power plants. It's you know, people. There's a reason that car companies continually go back to this straight six design,
Hmm.
and it's because it just works. It just feels right. And there's nothing wrong with a well balanced V6 or it's kind of like German luxury inline six is kind of like American muscle car V8.
Hmm.
It's just right.
Hmm.
It's what it should have. And the Benz is like such a great a well executed application.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's a nice differentiator too in this like sort of era of turbo fours or like enormous V8s sort of on their dying breaths, if you will. It's just a
Right.
very usable engine. I think it's kind of neat that Stellantis is going to roll one out too. We're going to see that. Speaking of dying V8s and some of the like the Mopar muscle cars, I think, and probably across their lineup, plenty of Jeeps. Um, really pleased with it. I have driven it before, but this is the first time like I rolled up a lot of miles on this thing. I went out to the other side of town, which is like, geez, how long is that? It's probably a 90-mile round trip and just a lot of miles piled up on this thing as far as just, driving the car, which is great. Um, I was impressed with it. The only thing I would sort of say that bugged me a little bit, and this is more of just like the overall, I think AMG 53, like just vibe. The exhaust note was kind of buzzy, and at times I was kind of like, it felt a little more turbo-y as opposed to like that real like inline six feel that you want to have. I mean, I guess in some ways in my head, I kind of chose to forget about the turbo and almost tell myself it was naturally aspirated. It's
Hmm.
not, but I mean, that's kind of how I was like playing it. But overall, a great car, handles well. Um, I think the GLE is in a good place, especially in 53 trim.
Yeah, turbos in general, when they use it for performance, then you know what you're expecting. Like you get on the gas and like there's maybe like a split second lag and then just whoosh and you feel it. And it's fun when it's specifically designed to make you go fast.
Yeah.
When automakers are kind of downsizing their engines, knowing that they're going to turbocharge them because it's a more efficient overall package, then you get what Greg is talking about here. Like, you're wanting just the feel of a naturally aspirated power plant, and when you feel the turbo kick in, it's just a reminder that that's not what you're driving. But still, I would say that I mean that's it's just a reflection of the times that we live in, that automakers have to do they have to pull out all the stops for efficiency in this, like, interim time between gasoline and fully electric vehicles. And Mercedes honestly probably does better than most, making their inline six feel like what you want it to feel like. Just a solid. I think ultimately it's the smoothness. Like it's got plenty of power, but it's just like the overall smoothness and I don't know, properness of it all that I appreciate.
I got to really mention too, this one really looked the part too. It was really dark, almost black color. I think it may have been kind of like a gray, and it just was really a tough looking vehicle. It had like 21-inch AMG twin spoke wheels with black accents, the enormous like sort of like AMG grill. It's funny, literally as I said that, an ad for Lexus popped up on the Autoblog homepage, so I guess everybody's listening to me, right? But just a really cool looking vehicle, I gotta say. A lot of brushed aluminum trim, that type of thing. It's pretty awesome. So
Awesome.
yeah, that is the GLE 53. Let's switch over to the 2 Series BMW. Which one did you drive?
Well, let's keep it all German.
Yeah.
Even the Rolls is like German owned,
It's
even though it's
ancestral,
a classically British
right?
company. Yeah.
Kind of. Which honestly, isn't the royal family kind of German too on some
Yeah,
sides?
I thought of that earlier, and like the moment passed, but yeah, I believe so. I mean, we watched like The Crown on Netflix and stuff like that, and yeah, you see it's a lot of German influence there. Anyway, I drove the 2 Series Coupe, and remember, there's two series, and hopefully that doesn't sound too confusing to people who are listening. There's the front-wheel drive base 2 Series Grand Coupe, which is not a coupe at all, but is a 4-door fastback. And then there's the 2 Series Coupe, which is rear-wheel drive, and that's like the classic BMW 2 that you probably instantly think of. The 2 Series Coupe that I drove was the 230, which is powered by a 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. You can also get the, I think it's the M240, which is the 6-cylinder, nearly 400 horsepower. Feels like total muscle car. The 230 that I drove is still very pleasant to drive. It's nicely quick. It's fairly efficient. I did real well, in solidly in the upper 20s while I had it. And yeah, it's like I think of it as the most BMW of all BMWs.
Yeah.
And I mean that in the way that it drives, the immediacy of the action, of like its dynamics. It just feels like a BMW more so than most BMWs. And I know that sounds strange, but I think to understand the point, you'd have to have like driven a lot of BMWs throughout the years and have really come accustomed and appreciated the way that that they drive, the way that they ride and handle. And a lot of current BMW models, including M models like the M3, M4, the performance of them is just off the charts. But there's a certain syntheticness to it, in like the steering, the inputs, the throttle pedal applications. They pump fake audio through the speakers. Like it's in their goal to make faster and faster and faster cars. They took a little bit out of like driver enjoyment out of it. And the 2 doesn't really suffer from that, like a little bit, because it's obviously still everything's controlled by electronics. It's not like you've got a direct unboosted steering or a cable connected from the throttle pedal to the engine, like an old car would be. But it feels more like you do, and I really appreciated that. I do think it sits in a unique spot too, which it's got something going for it. if you are shopping for a sporty coupe, there's not really a whole lot else to choose from. Like you'd have to look at like Mustangs and Camaros and Challengers to try to get a similar like performance driving feel, but it's a completely different kind of car. There's not a whole lot that competes with the BMW 2 Coupe. So yeah, it's definitely a vehicle that I'd recommend if you can get away with two doors and you want something maneuverable and fun to drive. The 2 Series Coupe is a really good option.
We are hearing rumors and seeing some prototypes for the next gen M2 coming up. Sounds like they're going to stick to the script. We're looking at actually a fairly high horsepower is what it sounds like they're going for, 450 horsepower, and somewhat of traditional styling. But I would agree with you. Whenever I've driven the M2 or the different versions of it, it's about as close as you get to like the 2002 or something, or the old M3 Coupe, or for a while they did have the M1, which was kind of the 1 Series M, I guess is the proper thing. Right. They also had the 1M, something different. But this to me is where I think sometimes where BMW is at its best. They could get some separation from Mercedes. Like Mercedes can do a luxurious SUV and many times just straight up sort of win on points, if you will, over BMW and sometimes Audi as far as just full luxurious executions. Whereas I think BMW, they like I said, in the current, the X3 I'm in and the X5, they tend to be a little more like less over the top, whereas Mercedes really goes for it. When it comes to like an M2 though, BMW can really just be like, look, this is who we are. Like they can just roll the ball out, and I think really it all just comes together. So this is a car I'm really excited to drive.
Yeah, and the cool thing about BMWs there's a lot of cool things about BMWs these days. But one cool thing is they're much better performers than you'd think they'd be on paper.
Yeah.
Something like 450 horsepower out of the M2, if that really is what it has, it's going to feel more like 550 horsepower from behind the wheel.
Yeah.
And all current BMWs are that way, all the way down to like their smaller 2-liter turbocharged engines. They all feel bigger and more powerful than the spec sheet would indicate. And dyno results show that too. Like it's not just your feeling from behind the seat, like it's more powerful than you expected. It really is more powerful than they rated at. And I'm not suggesting that they're doing anything like, I don't think that they're quote unquote underrating their engines on purpose. I think they're following a very specific set of parameters that the numbers that they're giving captures what it actually does under their circumstances. But out in the real world, they outperform their spec sheet, which is nice because, these days that's just not true.
Yeah.
Of most vehicles.
No, 100%. I think that's a good observation on, just how they like that real visceral experience you get behind the wheel. All right. Any final thoughts on the M2?
Well, this wasn't an M2 that I drove. It was a 230i.
230i, sorry.
Yeah, no, we were just talking M2. I do have a couple final thoughts on it. Another thing that I like about it, and not every time you have me on the podcast and we mention BMW, I always have to talk about the styling because, they lost me a long time ago with what they're doing on, a lot of their cars. Like, do it to a 7 Series, whatever. But, the M3 and M4 are just not attractive cars to me at all. And it kind of hurts me a little bit. But the 2 Series, they've added some like interesting creases. They've bulked out the fenders a little bit, almost like a Group B 80s, like Group B rally racer, like with squared off bulky fenders. I think this is proof that BMW's stylists can can push and can kind of express themselves without ending up with something that's just unattractive. I like the kind of bulldog stance of the 2 Series, especially in M240 guys. I think it looks great. Big, big wheel arches and wheels and that fill out those arches. And it also looks great in purple. Mine was red, but they look beautiful in that unique BMW purple shade.
And where do you stand on the grill again?
I hate
just to be clear,
the oversized grill, but I'd like to point out that the 2 Series in none of its current guises has the oversized crazy grill. It's got a legit, attractive, classically BMW kidney grill.
I actually really like the oversized grill. For a while, I was taking the the position that it only worked on certain vehicles, like some of the larger crossovers or even the 4 Series. I've just gone full on. I think it works. I think it harks back to some of their great grills from, the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I have no problems with it. I think it's functional. I mean, more air to the engine is not a bad thing. And even some of the different versions they've done where they've sort of toned it down so it's slightly smaller. I think that's maybe a little bit more of a sweet spot. I will give you that it is over the top, but I do think the large grill works. So, I mean, I think we gotta.
Here's where I would stand on it, and we don't need to belabor the point.
Nah.
You can look at the current, the 3 and 4 Series that have the big grills, the M versions. You can see that the grill is too large for the vehicle because the hood actually has to blister out to meet the edges of the grill. That's where they lose it. That's where they lose me. If they were to maximize the actual available space that's there with as big of a kidney nostril as they can fit without doing that, I think I'd be like, yeah, it's not really my thing, but it's okay. I get it. That's the design. But when it is obviously too large to be, to fit, they've got to like push out the edges even to make it, to make it fit. I think it's no longer cohesive, and that's the problem. So I mean, just like it's like an inch and a half. Like, just take the available space and maximize it. Fine, but they're making a statement by going even bigger and then blistering it down so that it comes and meets the natural flow of the body. Too much for me.
Fair take. That's actually, the devil is in the details. I mean, that's a fair take on how they could tweak that grill a little bit and get it, a little more closer to perfection, we'll say. I don't know. With that, let's talk about a car that doesn't have a particularly large grill. That's the crossover. James Riswick is on site. He's driving the Honda HR-V. What's going on, James?
Thanks, Greg. Yep, this is West Coast editor James Riswick, and in many ways, I'm doing exactly what I do every week. I'm driving a car through the Columbia River Gorge, taking in the spectacular scenery. I have just finished taking photos of that car, shooting video. I'm sitting right next to the Columbia River. I'm sure there's a seal, somewhere over there, and a peregrine falcon overhead. Looking at just mountains on either side. Again, totally spectacular. But in this case, it is different because I'm on a press launch for the all-new 2023 Honda HR-V. It's very convenient. It's right here in my beautiful backyard, so to speak. So the HR-V, it is a lot bigger than the old version. It's over 9 inches longer. It is 2.5 inches wider. It's also now based on the Honda Civic as opposed to the Honda Fit. Now you can see that the difference in the back of this vehicle. Whereas the HR-V before had the Honda Fit's, quote, magic seat, which was the result of moving the gas tank under the front passenger, which freed up underfloor space. It just really opened up a whole lot more backseat and cargo space than the car's footprint would suggest. This car does not have that anymore. It has basically the same amount of cargo space as the old HR-V. So although it's bigger, it has the same interior space. Frankly, looking at the car, I'm not sure it's going to be as functional. The back seat also kind of low. For the subcompact, mid-compact SUV segment, this is probably going to be kind of a mid-pack vehicle in terms of size. In terms of interior quality, this is a lovely interior. It's very much similar to the Honda Civic upon which it's based. It does have that super cool hexagonal honeycomb metal look air vent that goes across the dash. A little different directional knobs. Instead of having the little round nubs that the Civic has, this has horizontal tabs that have a little metal look piece that continues the straight line through it. It's a pretty nice look. Really nice materials in this interior. Definitely better than average for the mid-compact segment. So think a Kia Seltos, VW Taos, as well as a Ford Bronco Sport. Now, driving impressions at this particular moment are embargoed, so that's why I'm only talking about things you can see and look and feel in the interior. The other thing is, this car looks a lot different, not just compared to the HR-V, but compared to other more recently introduced Hondas. It's not quite that kind of rugged look-ish thing that they're going with the new Passport and Pilot and what we expect to see with the CR-V. And it's definitely not what they're doing with the cars, with the Civic, the Accord, and that kind of started with the Insight. It's its own different thing. Frankly, I can't say I'm a big fan of the look. I don't think it looks that much better in person than it does in photos, particularly from the front. From the rear, it's actually quite nice. In general, though, as my phone dings at me, it doesn't have as much of an SUV look to it. It's a little wagony, little hatchbacky. It's not as crossover-like as some of the other vehicles in the segment. So that's all I can say for now about the all-new Honda HR-V. But otherwise, I'm going to continue on doing what, well, I guess I always get to do, luckily, every week here in Oregon/Washington, and that's to drive in probably one of the most underappreciated areas in the country for natural beauty. If you do get a chance to visit us out here, the Columbia River Gorge is just a gem and worth a drive, worth a hike, and definitely a place you want to visit. So thanks, back to you and the regular podcast, Greg.
All right. Thank you, James. Safe travels home. Let's talk some news. Jeremy, what do you think? Let's see here. Car executives want the tax credit cap lifted. In simple terms, this means you will be able to go to the dealer and say, hey, I want this electric car, I should say, and get the full $7,500 and not have to worry about, hey, did General Motors sell this many cars and they've already used up all their tax credits? Or Tesla, I believe, has already used up all of their tax credits because all they sell is electrics. So this would just make it so it's like level playing field. If you can sell more electric cars, your buyers could get the tax credit. As it is now, you might want a certain car, but you may not be able to get that full tax credit. It's a little nuanced, But I'll say this, if you're in the market for an electric car and you know that there's a $7,500 like incentive on the hood from the government, I think that could put you over the edge, you know? So what do you think?
Well, I've got a couple thoughts on this. I don't think it's fair that they punish car companies for their early success in EVs. Specifically General Motors. GM gets a lot of hate from a lot of different people for missteps in the past, but they came out with the Chevy Volt at like a perfect time, in my opinion. It was like a transition. It was like an early transition from gasoline to electric, and it seamlessly worked. And it was, just incredibly efficient. When I had a first gen, the very first model year, so the smallest battery capacity that they had, that they offered over the Volts model years, whatever. And for the week that I had it, I plugged it in when I could, and just drove on gas when it ran out, and I averaged over 100 miles per gallon. And it was just my normal driving, and I think that's indicative of what you'd get in the real world for most people that if they don't live super far away from the city and they're making like 40, 50 mile commutes all the time. And it was brilliant, and it made a lot of sense, and they sold a bunch of them, and then and each one of those sales counted. It was like a notch against them till they came out with the Bolt, and then don't get me started on Bolt, but hopefully you guys can hear the nuance in my voice when I say that. The Volt was the plug-in, the Bolt is the full EV, and yeah, they've sold tens of thousands of those now, and they've hit this point where they're being penalized for for offering consumers an early chance to get on the EV bandwagon. And Tesla too. Tesla is the most shining example, obviously, as the world's leader in electric vehicles. They're the best-selling EVs in the United States and in the world for good reason. And they're penalized too. And then there's, Ford is just, they dipped a toe in the market with things like the Fusion Energies and the C-Maxes and stuff like that. But we're literally talking dipping a toe. They didn't go fully, they didn't buy in like GM did. And now they're going to come and vastly benefit at a time when gas prices are super high. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for the consumer that they're going to have this option, but every Mach-E having the potential to get $7,500 off on your taxes, or if you lease it, you realize a lot of that savings right off the bat. So yeah, I don't think it's fair. I think car companies have reason to complain about it, to ask for it to be extended. But here's the devil's advocate view. They could just do away with it at this point. I'm not saying that they should. I'm not going to comment on the politics of the matter, but if we're talking about what's fair and what's a level playing field, either give it to all of them or give it to none of them. You could make a legit case that it's no longer needed. I think, what is it? Senator Manchin, Joe Manchin. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right. I've only ever read it. I've never heard it spoken. From West Virginia, he made a point that car companies are selling every EV that they can build, whether they've got the rebate available or not. So does it make sense to extend it? If you're talking in those terms, maybe not. However, as far as consumers go, cars are getting more and more expensive. And we're not talking about free money here. We're talking about, rebates on your taxes, and you have to have your tax liability has to be enough that you're going to realize that savings in the end. Again, unless you lease, and you might realize some of the savings or a good portion of the savings, right off the bat. I understand the argument to go like really all in on it. I think the Build Back Better plan that stalled in Congress or Senate or whatever, it was going to extend it to 12,500. It was going to add extras for U.S. made. It was going to add extras for U.S. made batteries, and also extras if it was made by a union. I think that was bound to fail because of all those caveats and gotchas. But I get the idea of really speeding EV adoption, and if you believe, which I do, if you believe in climate change and man-made causes of it, we got to get off fossil fuels. Why not give consumers an extra reason to go in that direction? Like if you believe that we're causing this problem and that there's a potential solution to it, and one of the potential solutions is monetary. I mean, if we're talking about money versus the future, that's an easy choice. The future wins every time, right? So yeah, I mean, it's a very big argument. I think the car companies are probably right to band together and say, extend this, because Ford's going to hit the number here, soon, and Toyota will hit the number, and Nissan will hit the number. All the car companies are going to hit their figure where they no longer qualify for it soon enough. So it makes sense that they would all band together now, even though some of them haven't lost it yet. So yeah, I mean, as the consumer editor, I would be in favor of them extending it out entirely or getting rid of it entirely, one or the other.
It's an interesting position staking out there. Couple thoughts here. One, if they extend it, this could help certain cars like tremendously, like the Chevy Bolt, because again, Chevy, General Motors, they've exhausted their credits years ago, actually. So I mean, now you're talking about a car, nominally a crossover that could be quite affordable. That sort of thing where if you take $7,500 off the price of some of these sort of mid-level cars, they drop from, like, let's just make up, a EVX is like 35. You can get that down to roughly 28. That's a screaming deal for what's generally pretty technologically sophisticated, funded drive, product of the future, right? That's a pretty good deal. So just from, again, like a raw consumer perspective, you could really be looking at, getting into a different, higher level of transportation, if you will, if that's what you want to do. Second thought, there's some tax nuance here. Like if your liability is not greater than $7,500, you may not get the full credit. So that's the kind,
or any at all.
It just kind of looking around at some of the, again, the nuance to that. We've looked at getting the plug-in Pacifica hybrid because, hey, it's a hybrid minivan, right? With 30 miles of electric range. Sounds pretty good for a family, right? But I've been talking to my tax advisor, like, well, hey, like, how would this actually work for me? I mean, so there is some nuance, and if your tax bill isn't particularly high that year, you've got some things to do, like maybe write off some investments or something, so you have a bigger tax hit that year, and then go get your plug-in, BMW or whatnot. It's not straight cash that the consumer gets. I've talked to John Snyder about this, our senior editor for All Things Green. I don't know what his current position is, but I'll go ahead and speak for him. He had suggested that even just more like straight incentives could work, as opposed to making it this tax thing, which is quite complicated. And one of the reasons that that broader legislation failed is, like, to your point, there were so many different caveats and nuances that, again, I mean, car buyers just want money. They want to know how much money is on the hood of the car. And even this, which is fairly straightforward, isn't totally straightforward. Anything that you have to consult with your tax guy means it's a little more challenging than it could be. So I think in general, I would like to see them extend it, maybe even increase it. But I could also see a better way of doing it, which might be take away all the incentives and just, see if the market could correct on the pricing for EVs. I mean, as is right now, I think automakers have to try to build in, well, maybe some people can get the credit, so we're going to charge this much. We can market this price over here. There's like a lot of different prongs that go into it. It might be better for the automakers and the consumers if they could just be like, okay, the Bolt is going to cost $31,000. General Motors is going to know if they're going to make money or not at that point on it. And then everybody lives with it. And then over time, you decide if, hey, you're going to make more, like where your profitability comes in. And maybe it's on like the second generation of said product. So, I mean, that's me going all over the place. But in the short term, I would like to see them extend it and, extend the incentives, but also make it so it's a level playing field currently. Like if you want to invest in EVs, your customers could get that. That's how I would do it right now. Yeah. But to bring it together, I would agree with you that just a rethinking of the overall strategy. Maybe there's no incentives. Maybe it's more or tax incentives. Maybe it's straight cash incentives.
Yeah.
There could be a better way to do this. This is old legislation too. It dates to 2004 from the Bush administration. So,
and also
yeah.
I think that this is okay. Not to get like, too crazy and nuanced with it, but there maybe should be a price cap on it. A lot of people have brought this up that like, okay, so you're buying a Porsche, an electric Porsche that costs $180,000 and Porsche hasn't, hit the thing yet, and you get your $7,500 tax break on it. Does the person buying a $180,000 Porsche need it? Yeah, probably not. I don't think that was what, a big thing that factored into their purchase decision. Someone who's buying a $35,000 Bolt or a $45,000, electric crossover, or even let's say a $65,000, Cadillac EV. Those people like that could actually be the thing that sways them into getting the zero emission vehicle. That makes sense to me. So maybe they can, I mean, I don't think it's ever going to happen because we're talking politics now. But if they just came up with a set of rules that, everyone could be on board with, like, no one wants the super uber wealthy people to just get $7,500 back. But if we want the young family to be able to afford the EV that they couldn't afford otherwise, I think, in general, people would be in favor of that.
It's interesting too, like you mentioned politics. It's also like, it doesn't have to be politics. Like one of my earlier points was this original policy was like President Bush legislation from back then. So it's definitely the kind of thing where, I mean, it's gone through, 4 different presidents since then, or 3. So it's like, both sides of the aisle could look at this and say, hey, how do we want this to work? Is it, and the other thing too, I would say is from like an industry perspective, I kind of wonder if, like, to me, it comes back to the cost of developing this technology. That's where I like start to look at it. Like automakers are trying to bake that figure into the pricing strategy. And to me, that's where things get a little confusing and where maybe there would be a way to do this better, but we'll see. And it's also like different states have their own sets of incentives. But again, you got to have that tax liability, to make it actually pay off. So, I guess we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces to it. And, even looking at some of the different proposals over the years, it does get, perhaps there's more nuance to this. To me, it should be more like, how does this work for automakers and how does this work for consumers? And politicians are kind of coming at it from different ways, which is fine. That's how problems are solved or not solved in this country. But there's some tactical things here that, as somebody who's nominally in the market for an EV and who covers the industry, you start to see some of the challenges with the existing legislation or plan,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the plans being proposed. So should we shift gears and talk about some product? It's an EV. It's not eligible for the $7,500 tax credit. It's the Chevy Blazer coming up in 2024. This is the all-electric version. Looks drop dead gorgeous.
It really does. I love the way it looks.
July 18th, I think, is the full reveal. We'll get more information. Yep. I'm impressed. I think this looks even better than the gasoline-powered version. It's got very much like a wagon type look. Kind of looks like something Polestar might roll out. Love the front end. A few years ago, I interviewed Mark Royce, and he said something like, the way Chevy wins is by being like sort of the boldest American brand. And his point is it's not this like syrupy retro thing. It's like being the best in the time you're in, which is what they did when like their style was just crushing everybody in the 50s and 60s. And this to me is like takes that theory and manifests it in a current product. So very excited to see where this goes.
I am too. And I like the trend that Chevy is doing here with their EVs. This is June 2022 because these podcasts live forever on the internet. Chevy made a big announcement. Was it a week, maybe 2 weeks ago? I don't recall exactly. They were cutting like $6,000 off the price of the Bolt EV and the Bolt EUV, which is like the slightly larger, slightly more crossover-y version. And I think what they're doing is they're making way for a lot of their upcoming products, like this Blazer EV. It's going to be relatively affordable. Like people are going to be able to actually, we were just talking about this huge debate on the tax credit. What GM seems to be doing is like, well, we don't have the tax credit anymore, and we're going full in on EVs. So we're going to have to come up with a pricing strategy that will allow us to compete. So, I mean, I suspect they'll be able to do that, with like decontented versions, and the one that you really want is going to be, $7,000, $8,000 more than the base price. But I think that's fine. Like they're offering this, these reasonably priced and desirable vehicles to the heart of the market. And everything we've seen, all the EV stuff we've seen up to this point, or nearly all of it, has been aimed at the an upper market. Teslas are pretty expensive. We talked about the Porsche Taycan. We talked, and it's not every GM. I mean, look at the Hummer. It's 100,000, 150,000, depending on what you get. They have expensive EVs too, but I love that we're finally getting to a point where the heart of the market is being is going to draw these electric vehicles that don't look like appliances. They look like desirable vehicles. I fully suspect it'll drive like a desirable vehicle too, which I think is great.
Yeah, I think this one looks like a winner. That would be my way to kind of bring it together. Real quick, let's talk about a couple of Ford recalls. Pretty significant, 50,000 Mach-E's, which is a significant amount of just the Mach-E's that have been made all time. They can fix that one with a software flash, it sounds like. And then over 3 million Fords, which you wrote that piece. So, Mr. Consumer Editor, what do you think of these recalls?
Yeah, well, I mean, Ford has a tendency to do this. They'll I don't know if it's just happenstance or if they decide to get all the bad news out at once, but they announce a whole bunch of recalls. This 3 million vehicles, first of all, the number's huge. Second of all, we're talking like Ford Escape, Ford Edge, like these are crossovers, the Fusion, like big deal cars, like tons and tons of them sold. And so that's why we're talking about the numbers being so high. First of all, let's talk about what the recall is. It's for a bushing in, that connects the shift lever to the transmission. A bushing is, if you don't know what that is, it's like, where two metal things might come together. There's a piece of hard plastic or hard rubber that, takes up the shock so that it's not metal on metal. Kind of like joints and ligaments. You want something compressible in there. And so there's a bushing, and it is starting to wear out. And, reading through all of the documentation from Ford this morning, it seems like it's especially an issue in hot and humid climates, which breaks down rubber and, plastics faster. And that's what's happened. So now, when someone shifts their vehicle, from park to drive or to reverse or whatever, it might shift fine, and they might not realize there's a problem. But the problem comes when they try to shift it back into park. It might not actually go into park because that bushing is degraded, and the vehicle, the shift lever itself might have been put into park. It may even show on the dash that it has gone into park, or it may not, but it's not actually in park. And so they shut the vehicle off, walk away, and it rolls. Because it wasn't put into park. Another consequence of that, if a vehicle isn't in park, the engine won't restart. So some people are walking out to their cars, it didn't roll away, but they try to start it up and drive away, and it won't start up. So it's kind of a double whammy there, roll away risk and risk of leaving you stranded. The other unfortunate part of this is not Ford's first time dealing with this issue. This is actually the 5th time Ford has recalled vehicles over a similar issue. It's easy to point fingers and say, like, man, you knew that you used the same parts in all of these vehicles. Don't you think maybe you should have just, recalled them all at once? I don't know if there's, supply and demand reasons for that. Like, if they did it all at once, would everyone be bringing their cars in, and they don't have enough bushings to replace it? I don't know if that's part of it. I don't even want to speculate as to whether it is. Or were they thinking, maybe the supplier used a different quality polyurethane in the bushing or something? I don't know the answers to any of those questions, but it's not a good look for Ford that they have done this 5 times now. And we're talking millions and millions of vehicles. Just earlier this year, they recalled a bunch of Lincolns for the same issue. They knew that the Escape had the same transmission, or the Fusion had the same linkage, the same transmission powertrain as the Lincoln. What is it, MKZ or I think MKZ. All those Lincoln MK names get confusing. And they only recalled the Lincolns earlier this year, and now they follow up with the Fusion. So yeah, I mean, I can't comment on the reasoning, but I can say it doesn't look good, especially if you're the owner of one of these cars. And let's say you are one of the few that Ford acknowledges, yeah, that car rolled away and it rolled into your garage door. There were a few slight injuries even from it. You can imagine the car rolling and going over a foot, or, there was a worse, this hasn't happened in this case, but worst case scenario, a couple of years, the Star Trek actor got pinned to his garage door and died it was actually a Jeep, but it was similar as a rollaway risk that, caused by a transmission issue. So, it's a serious thing, and it's a huge number, 3 million vehicles, very popular vehicles that you see on the road every single day. So, it is a big one.
I think this is kind of another, toe stub for Ford for just some of the quality issues. For some of their important launches in the last couple of years, they've had some issues in the first year. A lot of that was related specifically to like a Chicago area factory. But, this is a couple of years ago when we were talking about the success of the Lightning, the Bronco, the Mach-E. We were like, these products look amazing. Are they going to launch them okay? Because at that point, the record was a little scattershot in recent years. So it's a big recall. Check out our story. If you're wondering if your car is affected, head over to some of the federal sites too, and you can check that out as well. So, we're really jumping between like super serious and super luxurious parts on this podcast. And it's like M2 Rolls-Royce, tax credits, recalls. Chevy Blazer. So I guess we should spend some money, right?
Yeah, a little bit of something for everybody on this podcast, right?
All right, sounds good. Well, this is Ford. It's sporty. It's not businessy. Let's jump right in. Jacob in Utah writes, I've been wanting to get into a Ford Focus ST for a while, and I think I'm finally ready to get into it. The only problem is it's hard to find one within my $18,000 budget. It's a decent shape and has the options that he's looking for. Ideally, looking for a 2016 or newer because I don't like the interiors or infotainment systems of the pre-facelift models. Is this a case of him being too picky given his budget? We'll get to that in a minute, but probably. Do I buy an older or lower trim model and just get used to the My Ford Touch or lower trim sync systems, especially since performance-wise, the pre and post facelift Focus STs are similar? Can a case be made for something better? For an $18,000 hot hatch with the 6-speed manual, with creature comforts like a Golf GTI or a Mazda Speed 3? Or do I simply wait and hope that the used car market cools down to the point that a loaded up 2016 to 18 Focus ST becomes more affordable? The market will cool down, right? Ugh, I don't know about that one. Hard to say. I would say off the top, just some initial thoughts. I don't think you're being too picky, but I think given all the craziness going on, you might have to take one of those sort of pre-16 infotainment and interiors if you want to stay somewhere near your budget. Just because inflation in the used car market being what it is, I struggle to think you're going to be able to quite make your budgetary needs line up unless you go with the older car or you really look. I mean, good on you if you could find one that's newer and in your price point. But what do you think, Jeremy?
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It comes down to there's two questions here. One, how badly do you want the one with the interior and the infotainment that you want? How badly do you want that? You're going to have to answer that question, Jacob. The second thing is, are you going to be able to is the market going to cool down anytime soon? Probably not. If you're ready to pull the trigger, it's good that you're ready to pull the trigger and finally get the car that you want. But if that's the case and you've been waiting, you might just want to wait a little bit longer, save up a little bit more money, and buy the one that you actually want. I don't think it makes much sense to compromise over a few $1,000s in this day and age, in this marketplace. If the one that you want costs $21,000 and you've got $18,000 saved up, save a little bit longer and get the one that you really want. You're probably going to own it for several years. You're probably going to enjoy driving it for several years. I don't think this is a case where you compromise. If you're talking about, a $20,000 swing, then yeah, you're going to have to talk compromises. But we're talking about a few $1,000s. You might have to drive a little bit longer than you wanted to get the low mileage one or the color and options that you want. But this is an enthusiast vehicle, not something that they sold an absolute ton of. You're not shopping for a Camry. You're shopping for a Focus ST. So, widen your search out to 500 miles. Use Autoblog's used car finder tool. Set your budget, and you might have to wait a little bit. You might have to save a little bit more money. And in this case, to get what you actually want as a specialized vehicle, I think that's the way to go.
Jacob, I would say too, it's you're kind of right on the cusp too. Just looking at going through a few different listings here, you can get one here's one, a 2017 for $17,976, but it's got 111,000 miles on it. Here's a 16 for $18,488. You're right on that cusp. I think if you could get a little bit north of 20, I'm seeing one here for 23. Okay, this has 67, we'll call it 1,000 miles. It's a 2017. To me, that's a better car. That's a little more palatable. Here's one I'm seeing for 26 with only 39,000 miles. That seems like a little bit much for a 6-year-old Focus at that point, even in an ST, but still, you're I'd say a couple grand away from probably getting the Focus ST you want. So I think I would track with Jeremy's advice to maybe try and wait a little bit, hope the market's going to correct a little bit. I struggle to think that inflation in the used car market is going to stay this wacky for forever, right? Like at some point in a year or two, prices are going to come back down. You're going to have a little bit more money and you're going to be able to get the Focus ST that you want, which I thought that was a like just bananas car to drive. I thought it was so much fun. You know, my personal preference is I think I would go for a GTI over that car. The GTI is a little more refined. I personally preferred kind of that German engineered look and like the very precise dynamics. But the Focus ST was like, I believe, European tuned, if you will, as well, probably German from Ford's like, you know, European centers over there. So I mean, there's some of that as well. I just thought the car felt a little more, it wasn't as precise as the GTI. And the GTI prices, just looking around, you could get one. I'm seeing a 16 GTI with 85,000 miles for 16 grand. Seems like the price is there, probably because you like Golfs and GTIs. You know, I don't know what the sales numbers were, but I mean, they weren't as like, you know, these like special things as the ST was. You know, the ST was pretty like, that was Ford's return to hot hatches, and the people who wanted them got them and prized them. So, I mean, that's what I would do. I would probably wait it out just a little bit. But again, if it were me and I were in this segment, I would go GTI. So,
yeah, it's hard. It's hard to beat this. You know, it's hard to beat the GTI for performance and driving fun for less than $20,000. I don't know that I would choose it over a Focus ST. The Focus ST is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Feels to me, it's like a little bit more raw of an experience than the GTI's refined experience. You know, so pick your poison. Which one is it that you're looking for? They are comparable though.
Yeah.
And I actually did a little bit of searching too. And I found a Focus ST, a 2018 for $19,995, something like that in Virginia. They're out there. Like I said, you might have to drive. You might have to fly someplace and drive it home, but then you've got $1,000 plane ticket, so maybe it's not worth it. But yeah, I mean, I think when you're talking about, I said this before, I think when you're talking about like a very specific vehicle, just I don't think it makes sense to try to compromise what you actually want. Like, get the one that you actually want. I don't think you're gonna regret the few $1,000 difference in price a couple years from now.
The other thing too is it does depend a little bit is how long do you want to keep the car? Is this like fun for a few years? Maybe you don't try to time the market if that's the case. You know, you scrape together a little bit more money and make your move in like a few months. If you're going to keep it for 10 years, maybe again, you do want to try to, get more precisely what you want. But yeah.
Last little caveat I'll throw in here. If we're talking about the 2018 Ford Sync system, if you are going to keep it and you prefer that over the older ones, if you are going to keep it for a while, 5 years from now, that even the better Ford Sync system that came with is going to be pretty dated.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if that sways you at all to getting one of the, older ones or not, but just something to keep in mind and to consider is that, infotainment dates pretty quickly as they constantly get upgraded and changed. So, anyway, that's the last I've got on that.
All right. Well, I think that's the last we have on this podcast. We have hit all different parts of the cosmos, I will say. It's been a great show. Good catching up with you, Jeremy. If you enjoy the podcast, 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Be safe out there. Stay cool. Podcast at autoblog.com for your spend my monies. Be safe out there, and we will see you next week.